Hello dear students, today we are going to start a new lesson which is a friction. In previous lesson we learned about that what is the friction. The friction is a one contact force, but in today's class we will learn what are the types of the friction, who causes the friction, the factors affecting the friction and so on. In detail we will learn what is the friction. So in today's class we will learn what is exactly the friction, causes of the friction and the factors affecting the friction. Okay, have you ever thought that why a vehicle slows down when brakes are applied to it? Either you not apply a brake or you not accelerate your vehicle, but after some time it slows down. Similarly, the ball which is moving on a ground stops after some time when you not apply any force on it, right? So similarly, when you move on a or when you step on a banana peel, you slip down. Similarly, it is difficult to walk on a smooth and a wet floor. So why these all things happens? Why we cannot move smoothly on a slippery surface or on a moving surface? Why we fall down from the banana peel? So the reason or the answer of all these questions is the friction. Because we know that the friction is nothing but the force which opposes the motion of an object, which always overcome when you overcome this force friction, then only you are able to move. Means the friction is the force which opposes the motion of an object, and the necessary condition for that is there is an interaction between the two surfaces must be there. Means here also this man is trying to push this door towards the right side. Okay, but the force of friction opposes its motion. Means the force of friction is always acts from the opposite direction of the motion. Means the force, pushing force or the pulling force. Okay, and the force of friction acts from this opposite side. Means it's always opposes the motion of an object, right? We know that the frictional force is a contact force. We learn about in a previous class that the contact force and the non-contact forces. So the contact force is that force in which the two objects must be interact with each other, right? And the frictional force is a one type of that, the contact force. We already learned that or we study only that the friction in between the solids. Okay, but the friction offered by the solid also, the liquid also, as well as the gases also. We learn about that the solid friction, but in the liquid, when you are swimming in a water, right? At that time, the water opposes your motion. Means the water act as a frictional force to oppose your motion. Okay, when you overcome this frictional force to overcome the flow of water, then you are able to move forward. Similarly, in air, the birds are moving, the birds are flying. The air also opposes their motion. Means in the gas or in the air, the frictional force is the air which opposes the motion of that the birds or an aeroplane also. So not only the solid offers the frictional force, but the liquid and the gases also offers the frictional force. But in solid, the frictional force is maximum, and in a gases, the frictional force is minimum. Means the frictional force is maximum in a solid and the frictional force is minimum in the gases. We will see in a detail later on. Okay. Now the spring balance is there. What is a spring balance? Spring balance is nothing but one instrument which is used to measure a force, which is also called a Newton meter. In force and pressure, we learn about that the force, right? The force is a physical quantity. Physical means which is a measurable. Okay, but how we can measure the force? So we can measure the force with the help of this instrument called the spring balance. Now what exactly happens in that the spring balance? Spring balance is a do the same work as the rubber band does. Okay, in this spring balance there is a one spring, and on that spring there is a one pointer. Near that one spring, there is a one scale which is a calibrated in a Newton. Okay, means whatever the reading you got or you will get, you can measure it through. You can measure it in newtons, not in centimeter or not in a meter. So, what exactly happened in this string? Here is a one hanger through which you can attach any object on which you have to apply a force. So as soon as when you apply the object to this hanger, what happens? The spring is pulled down by the weight of that the object. When the spring is pulled down, the pointer also pulled down, right? Means the pointer is also moved from the its initial position to the any position, right? And these where the pointer ends, okay, this is the weight of your object. Means if at the initial position, if the pointer is on the zero, and when you attach the object, then the spring is pulled down. Similarly, the pointer also pulls down, and it comes at any one particular number, and this number or this reading is the weight of that the object. So with the help of this spring balance, you can measure the force of an object. Means whatever the force you applied on that the particular object, you can measure it with this help of that the spring balance. It is a simple instrument which is used to measure the force, which is also called a Newton meter. Okay, now the next is the cause of friction. Now who causes the friction? Exactly what happens now? The surface of the solids or the surface on which the object is moved, they not actually the smooth. They appear as a smooth, but they are not actually the smooth. Some irregularities are present in them, and these irregularities we can say that they are the hills and the valleys. Consider that this is a one book which is appear as a smooth, which is kept on that the table. This table also appear as a smooth, but actually they are not smooth. Some irregularities are present in that the objects. Okay, consider this is the book surface and this is the table surface. Okay, gray color is the table surface and the white color is the book surface. So some irregularities are present in that surfaces, like that the hills and the valleys. You know that the hills, okay, like these are the hills, and we can say that the distance between these two hills is the valleys. So what exactly happens? We know that the frictional force is a contact force. When two objects or when the two surfaces are in a contact with each other, then at that time the hills and the valleys of the two surfaces are interlocked, are stick together. Okay, when they are in a contact with each other, when these type of surfaces come in a contact, they becomes interlock, and at that time the opposing force comes into the role. This opposing force is the frictional force, and the frictional force opposes the motion of an object. See here also, here is a one box which is kept on that the surface. Okay, so the object try to move to to the right side, but the frictional force opposes its motion, and it acts from that the opposite side of that the applied force. These both surfaces are looked as a smooth, but they are not actually the smooth. See here, this is the surface of the box and this is the surface of this table. There are some irregularities are present, such as the valleys and the hills. When they are in a contact with each other, they interlock, they stick together, like that the fingers of our hands. Okay, consider that this is the one object, this is the another object. When they interact with each other, at that time they interlock. Consider that these two fingers of my one hand, they are the hills, and the distance between these two fingers is the valley. Okay, this is the one surface and this is the another surface. There is also the two hills and this is the valley. When they are come in contact with each other, at that time they becomes interlocked. Okay, they are not able to move. When uh, they are able to move when I apply the greater force on that. Okay, then only they are able to move. Means here also see the box is able to move when you are apply the larger force on that the box. Up till that they becomes the interlock. See here like that they interlock, and when you are apply a greater force, then they becomes a unlock and they overcome that the frictional force. Okay, so means when they are interlocked with each other, at that time the frictional force acts on that the surface. So this is the cause of the friction. Interlocking is the cause of the friction. Due to this interlocking, the object is not more able to move forward or not able to take their motion. Okay, so these are the cause of the friction. So if the surface is the smooth, then the friction is the less, because there are less irregularities on the smooth surface and the more irregularities present on the rough surface. If both the surfaces are smooth, means there is a less irregularities and there is a less interlocking. Okay, and the force of friction is also less, and the object is easily moved on that the smooth surface. But if the both the surfaces are rough, then the more irregularities are present in that surfaces. Okay, and if the more irregularities, means there is a more chances of the interlocking, and if there is a more interlocking, then the force of friction is also more there. Okay, that's why we fall down from that the smooth surface, because there is a less friction, but we are able to walk on that the rough surface because there is a greater friction. Okay, so this is the reason behind that the friction. Now the factors affecting the friction. Who causes the friction? Which factors affect this the friction? Now consider that I am giving you a two cases. Consider this is a one case. In this one case, there is a smooth surface, and on that smooth surface, the object moving, whose surface is also the smooth. Okay, means the smooth object moving on the smooth surface. And the second condition is there is a rough object which is moving on that the rough surface. So the question is that who offers the more friction? Of course, the rough surface offers the more friction, right? Because the irregularities present on that the rough surface is a more, and the irregularities present in that the smooth surface is a less, right? Means the factor affects the friction, means this surface affects the friction, right? Means the factor is the nature of the surface. What is the nature of the surface? If the surface is a smooth, then there is a less friction. But if the surface is a rough, means there is a greater friction. Means it depends on the nature of the surface. What surface you have used to move on that the object. Okay, so the nature of the surface is the factor affect the friction. Means we can say that if there is a smooth surface, then the friction is low, but if there is a rough surface, then the friction is high. And if there is a smooth surface, then you required a less push or a small push, and the friction is the low. But if there is a rough surface, then you required a big push, means you required a more force, and the friction is also the more here. So the one factor is that nature of the surface. If the nature of the surface is a smooth, means there is a low friction. If the nature of the surface is a rough, then there is a high friction or more friction. Okay, so this is the one factor. The second factor is, consider that if I use this two boxes, one box whose weight is a 7 kg, another box whose weight is 4 kg. Both the box are kept on that the same surface from the same position, on the same position. Okay, now if I want to move or I want to give a push to both this box, so which box is a move more further, more far? Okay, so of course the object whose weight is less is move more far. So why this happens? 7 kg box is not traveled a more distance, but the box whose weight is 4 kg they traveled a more distance because it depends on the force with which the two surfaces are pressed together. The force pressed by the 7 kg box on that the table exerted more. Similarly, the surface also exert the more force on that the box. And when they press together with a more force, they becomes more interact, they becomes more interlock. And hence, if they more interlock, then the force of friction is more here. Okay, and if there is a force of friction is more, then the object is not more able to move forward, right? But in this case, the box whose weight is a 4 kg, they press a less, means they exert a less force on that the surface, and this surface also exert the less force on this box. Okay, and they less interlock, and hence the chances of the uh, force of friction, or the chances of that the interlocking is less, and the force of friction is also less. And hence, if the force of friction is less, then the object is easily moved forward. Okay, so the another factor affect the friction is how the object pressed together, means the force with which the two surfaces are pressed together, how much force applied by this object and this surface on each other. This is the another factor. Means there are the two factor. One is the nature of the surface and another is the surfaces pressed together. Right? Means we can say that friction is more if the surface are pressed harder, and the friction is less if the surface are not pressed harder. Okay, so what we learn in this today's class, that what is the friction? So the friction is the opposing force, okay, which opposes the motion, and it always acts from the opposite direction of the applied force. Then the causes of the friction. Who cause the friction? The irregularities present in the surface, they causes the friction. Due to this irregularities, the surfaces are interlocked with each other, and the force of friction come there. Then the factors affecting the friction. Two factors affecting the friction. One is the nature of the surface and another is the two surfaces pressed together. If the surface pressed together harder, then there is a more friction, and if the surface press low, not press harder, then the friction is less. Okay, so in the next class we will learn the types of the friction.